All right, so let me just do 2 more examples. Find the measure of angle A to the nearest degree. Okay, my measure of angle A corresponds to the side length of 17 feet, and I know my other 2 side lengths. So I'm going to start with my bookends. Here's my side length. Here's the cosine of its corresponding side. They're opposite of each other in the triangle, and now the order of the other 2 side lengths doesn't matter. 10 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 10 times 11 times the cosine of A. Okay, on the previous example, all of the values were on the right-hand side of the equal sign, and our unknown was our side length. So we were able to plug everything in at once, take the square root, and then we're finished. You have to think of this problem like it being 17 equals 10 plus 11 minus 2 times 10 times 11 times x. For whatever reason, when students see this cosine of the angle measure, you totally lose the fact that 2 times 10 times 11 is its coefficient. So a lot of times we see students combine all these numbers together and then just put x with it. But if we gave you the problem 17 equals 10 minus 2x, you wouldn't tell me that 10 minus 2x gives you 8x and then solve from there. So you have to use that same line of reasoning and keep in mind your order of operations. Okay, so we can combine some things, but it's got to be in the right order. So 17 squared is 289. Next, I can add those guys together. So 10 squared plus 11 squared, that's going to give me 221 minus, now I can multiply all of these. So 2 times 10 times 11, that would give me minus 220 times the cosine of A. And I'm going to write it down so you do not do it. You cannot then tell me that this is equal to 1 times the cosine of A. Okay, you cannot take 221 minus 220. Then you're falling into this mistake where nobody would make that. All right, so our next step, we're going to subtract that 221 from both sides. So we get 68 is equal to negative 220 times the cosine of A. Public enemy number 2. This is a minus sign, but once we subtract that negative 221, it makes our number a negative. Do not lose the minus. Next, we got to divide both sides by negative 220. So 68 divided by negative 220. And I'm going to actually go to my calculator for this one. All right, so again, I make sure that my mode is in degrees. So I'm going to do 68 divided by negative 220. And I get this big long decimal. So instead of rounding the decimal, let the calculator do the work for you. So remember, I'm solving for my angle measure using my cosine ratio. So I'm going to do second cosine, inverse cosine of my answer. So notice above the negative sign in blue is ANS. That takes the answer from the previous line. So my answer would be 108 degrees. Oh, it's still recording. Sorry. I thought I paused it. So what did we do? We did the inverse cosine of 68 divided by negative 220. And we got the measure of angle A would be 108 degrees to the nearest degree, making sure I'm reading directions. Okay, and that's all I need. All right, next one, find the length of CB to the nearest tenth. Okay, CB, I'm going to put my X here. So now when I look at what corresponds, okay, here's the measure of angle A. Its corresponding side length is unknown. I'm given the measure of angle B as 79, and its corresponding side length is 32 centimeters. All right, so if I initially check out my law of sines, sine of 79 degrees over 32 equals the sine of angle A over X. It appears that there's 2 unknowns. But please don't forget, what do the 3 angles in a triangle add up to? 180 degrees. So really, I can find the measure of angle A just by subtracting 45 and 79 from 180. So I get the measure of angle A is 56 degrees. Okay, well now, since I have that, replace A with 56 degrees. Now I only have one unknown. Again, be careful when you're cross multiplying. So I would have x times the sine of 79 degrees equals 32 times the sine of 56 degrees. Just as a force of habit, I always keep the coefficients in front of the trig functions because then hopefully you're not making the mistake on the calculator. Okay, I'm going to divide both sides by the sine of 79 degrees. I can't separate the 79 from the trig function. So now this whole ratio is exactly what I'm going to plug into my calculator. Okay. And I get x equals, to the nearest tenth, it would actually be 27.0 centimeters. All right, and let's go back to the calculator here. So 32 times the sine of 56 degrees, make sure that you're closing the parenthesis after the initial angle measure, divided by the sine of 79 degrees. Close that parenthesis, and there's my answer. Okay, so yes, you could write 27 because the decimal is a 0, but just make sure that if it were anything else, it has to be included. Okay, so that should do it for the examples and give you a good idea of law of cosines, where all the values are on the one side of the equal sign. Law of sines, where we had to find an angle measure using inverse trig. Law of cosines, finding the angle measure using inverse trig. And then lastly, law of sines, where we have the two angle measures and we're just looking for the missing side length, so no inverse needed. All right, that'll do it.